She said my name to her father, and then she said the word boyfriend, and the two of them were in the same sentence, and I stood there in the July heat with a bag of potato chips I had been told to bring and absolutely no idea when we had agreed to this. Her father shook my hand. He had a grip that meant something. He said he had heard a lot about me. I looked at Maya Reyes. She smiled the way she smiled when she had won an argument she had not technically started yet. I had the distinct feeling this was going to be a very long afternoon. My name is Owen Park. I am 34 years old. I work in product development at a mid-sized tech company that is large enough to have politics and small enough that you cannot avoid the people those politics involve. I manage the West Coast launch pipeline. My job is to get things out the door on time, under budget, and without catching fire, a metaphor I have had to occasionally deploy, literally when working with the engineering team. I am good at my job. I am told this with some regularity by people who are not Maya Reyes, which is all people except Maya Reyes. Maya Reyes runs competitive strategy on the same floor. She is the person whose job is to know everything about what the market is doing before the market knows it is doing it. She is excellent at her job. She is also, and I say this with the complicated respect you develop for someone who has beaten you to a meeting agenda item 17 times in 18 months, the most effectively irritating person I have encountered in a professional context. She challenges every timeline I submit. She appears at my desk with questions that are phrased as questions and function as audits. She once CC'd our VP on a reply all that I still think about. We are not enemies. I want to be precise about that. We are rivals in the way that two people can be rivals when they respect each other too much to be simple about it. The friction is real. So is the respect. I have known for a while that both of those things are true simultaneously, and I have filed that under categories I do not examine at work. She knocked on my door at 9:17 on the 4th of July. I know the time because I had been awake for 11 minutes and had not yet made coffee, which meant I was not at my best, which I suspect was not an accident. She was not wearing her lanyard. She wore it every day at the office. She said she liked having her hands free, but I think she also liked the small authority of it, the way it said I belong here without her having to say it. She was not wearing it now. She was wearing a blue sundress and carrying a tote bag, and without the lanyard she looked like a slightly different version of the person I argued with on Tuesdays, softer at the edges, and I registered this fact and immediately set it aside because I had not had coffee. She said, "I need a favor." I said, "Good morning." She said, "Yes, good morning. I need a favor." I had poor survival instincts at 9:17 without coffee. I said, "What kind of favor?" She said her family's 4th of July barbecue was in 2 hours. She said that 6 weeks ago, without thinking it through, she had told her mother she was seeing someone, because her mother had been asking the same question on a recurring schedule since Maya's last relationship ended, and she had said yes to make the question stop. She said that since then, the story had escalated, as stories do when you are not paying close enough attention to them, to the point where her mother had told her grandmother, and her grandmother had told her aunts. And it was now a known family fact that Maya was bringing her boyfriend today, and she had spent the last week trying to think of a way out of it, and had not found one. She looked at me. She said, "You are the only person I trust enough to ask." I said that was either a compliment or a threat, and I had not decided which. She said, "Owen," I said, "you want me to pretend to be your boyfriend at your family's 4th of July barbecue?" She said, "I want you to attend a family gathering as my guest and allow certain misapprehensions to persist for the duration of the afternoon." I said those were the same thing. She said they were not technically the same thing. I said, "Why me? You know other people." She said, "I know other people who would ask follow-up questions, or who would tease me about it for the next 2 years, or who would be weird about it afterward." She did not say what category I fell into. She looked at me in the way she looked at me when she was waiting to see if I would catch up without being told. I said, "And you think I won't be weird about it afterward?" She said, "I think you have exactly the same investment as I do in making sure this afternoon is unremarkable for both of us. Which means we have identical incentives, which makes you the most strategically sound choice." I said, "That is the least romantic reason anyone has ever asked me to be their boyfriend." She said, "You are not my boyfriend. You are performing an administrative function." I said I needed coffee before I agreed to perform any function, administrative or otherwise. She came inside and made coffee. She knew where everything was because she had been to my apartment once before, months ago, when a work crisis had required us to be in the same room at 11 at night, and my building had been closer to the office than hers. She had made coffee then, too, efficiently and without asking, and I had found that either irritating or useful and had not resolved which. She made good coffee. That was its own kind of problem. We sat at my kitchen table while I drank it. She had a list on her phone of things I would need to know: her parents' names, her sister's name, the name of the dog, the general broad strokes of how we had met. She had told her mother we met through work, but had been deliberately vague about the nature of the work relationship, which I thought showed a kind of foresight she usually reserved for competitive market analysis. I said, "What's the dog's name?" She said, "Mango. He's very suspicious of everyone initially, and then falls completely in love with them. Don't try to force it. Just exist near him." I said I could do that. She said, "My grandmother will ask you what your intentions are." I'm not joking. She's done it to every person any of us has ever brought home. Just be direct with her. She will respect that more than charm. I said, "What are my intentions?" She looked at me. She said, "Tell her you're serious." There was a beat. I said, "About the performance?" She said, "Yes, obviously," I said. "Right." She looked at her phone. I looked at my coffee. The morning outside the window was doing what mornings do on the 4th. That particular quality of light that is already too warm by 9 and promises to be oppressive by noon. I was going to a barbecue with Maya Reyes. I was going to stand in a backyard in another borough and tell her grandmother I was serious. This was the administrative function. I am very good at not examining things at work. I am somewhat less good at it at 9:30 in the morning, in my own kitchen, with no lanyard to look at. We took the train. She did not take the lanyard, but she had a tote bag with a bottle of wine inside, and a tote bag that said something in Spanish I did not speak well enough to translate quickly. She translated it without me asking. She said it meant "the one who arrives decides." She said her grandmother had given it to her. She said it was advice, not a proverb, and that there was a difference. I said, "What's the difference?" She said, "A proverb is something people say. Advice is something someone meant specifically for you." I thought about that for 2 stops. We arrived at her parents' house at 11:40. It was a house in the kind of neighborhood where everyone knows everyone, and the block has an opinion about the 4th. Half the driveways were already decorated, and somewhere down the street someone had started early with fireworks that were not technically legal and did not care. The yard was already full. Her mother came to the gate before we reached it. Her mother had Maya's eyes and a warmth that Maya deployed more carefully. She hugged Maya. She turned to me. She said, "So, this is Owen." She said it the way people say a name when they have been sitting with it for a while. I said it was nice to meet her. She said Maya had told her I was patient. She said it with the specific weight of a woman who knew her daughter and had chosen the word accordingly. Maya, beside me, was extremely interested in the middle distance. I said that patience was relative. Her mother laughed, and that seemed to be the right answer. Her father found us 10 minutes later at the chip table, and that was when it happened. Maya said my name, said boyfriend, and I discovered that I was the kind of person who could absorb a significant surprise and smile through it, which I had not known about myself before that moment. Her father had the grip. He had heard a lot about me. I looked at Maya. She gave me the smile. I shook her father's hand and said it was good to be there, and managed not to say anything that was technically untrue. The afternoon had a rhythm to it that was distinct from anywhere I had been before. Her family was loud in the warm way, overlapping conversations, someone always starting a sentence before the previous one had ended, food arriving from the kitchen in waves without anyone formally announcing it. Her sister Daniela was 2 years younger and had Maya's quickness but aimed it differently, outward instead of strategic, and she found me within the first 20 minutes and said, with the directness of someone who had been waiting, "She talks about you constantly. I just want you to know that." I said, "At work?" She said, "In general." Maya appeared at my elbow with a plate of food and a look that said she had heard that and was going to deal with Daniela later. Mango the dog found me at 1:15, sniffed my shoes for 45 seconds with deep professional skepticism, and then sat on my foot. I existed near him. He approved. Maya watched this happen from across the yard, and I caught her watching, and she looked away, that slight, deliberate look away that I had seen at the office, and told myself meant nothing, because at the office, everything meant something else. Her grandmother found me at 2 o'clock, with the precision of someone who had been timing it. She was small and extremely specific, the kind of person who gives you their full attention as a form of measurement. She sat beside me on the back step. Maya had gone inside to help with something, and she looked at me for a moment without preamble. Then she said, "Tell me." I said, "What would you like to know?" She said, "What you see when you look at her." I thought about that. I thought about saying something careful, something that fit the brief and moved us through the conversation efficiently. I am good at that at work. I can give you the answer that closes the loop. Instead, I said, someone who thinks faster than she lets on, who challenges things because she actually cares whether they're right, not because she wants to win, who works harder than anyone I know and pretends it's effortless because she doesn't want to need the credit. I stopped. Someone who showed up at my door this morning and made coffee in my kitchen without asking, and knew exactly where everything was. Her grandmother was quiet for a moment. She said, "And you are serious?" I said, "Yes." She said, "I believe you." She said it with the authority of someone who had been asking this question for a long time and knew what a lie looked like. Then she patted my arm once and stood up and went back inside, and I sat on the back step with Mongo, who had followed me, and I thought about what I had just said and could not find the part of it that was performance. Maya came back out with 2 cold drinks. She handed me one. She sat beside me where her grandmother had been. She said, "How did it go?" I said, "She said she believed me." Maya looked at her drink. I said, "I told her you work harder than anyone I know and pretend it's effortless." She said, quietly, "That's not. You didn't have to say something real." I said, "I know." She did not say anything for a moment. The yard around us was at that mid-afternoon volume where everything is comfortable and no one is trying too hard anymore. Somewhere down the block, the illegal fireworks had escalated. Mango was deeply indifferent to this. She said, "She's going to ask me about it later." I said, "What will you tell her?" She said, "I don't know yet." I said, "Maya," she turned. I said, "Daniela said you talk about me constantly." She said, "Daniela has a poor sense of scale." I said, "She said in general, not at work." In general. Maya looked at the yard. Her fingers tightened once around her drink. She said, "I think about you in general. I don't know what to do with that, and I'm not sure this is the moment to." She stopped. She said, very quietly, "You made a whole face when she said it. I saw you." I said, "What face?" She said, "The face you make when you've just gotten information that changes your position, but you're not ready to update yet." I said she had been watching me closely enough to categorize my faces. She said, "I work with you. I've been watching you for 18 months. I said, "I know. I've been watching you for 18 months. She went still. Not dramatically, just still. The way a person goes still when something lands differently than they expected it to. I said, "I don't think this is as administrative as you told me it was." She said softly, "No, I don't think it is either." I said, "You picked me." She said, "I picked you." I said, "Out of everyone you know, everyone who would have been easier, you came to my door." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I wanted you there." I couldn't figure out how to say that without it being a thing, so I made it a logistical problem instead. Because I'm very good at logistical problems. A beat. That is a slightly embarrassing thing to admit out loud. I said, "I drove 40 minutes on a federal holiday to attend a barbecue as an administrative function." She said, "Yes." I said, "I also know where the dog's name came from, and I have met your grandmother, and your father shook my hand." She said, "Yes." I said, "I'm not sure I'd do all of that for an administrative function." She looked at me. For once, she did not look away. She held it, the way she held things at work when she had reached a conclusion and was deciding whether to say it. And then she said, "When my mother asked me who I was seeing, I said, 'Your name.' I didn't plan to. It just came out first. And then I had to build a whole architecture around it and tell myself it was practical, and the whole time I knew I had said your name, because that's..." She stopped. "Because that's the name that was there." That hit harder than I expected. I said, "You could have told me that at 9:17 this morning." She said, "I could not have told you that at 9:17 this morning. I could barely tell you now." I said, "Okay?" She said, "Okay?" I said, "I have also been doing a thing for 18 months where I tell myself the friction is professional, and the respect is professional, and none of it means anything that requires me to do anything about it. I'm done telling myself that." She said, very carefully, "We work together." I said, "I know." She said, "It would be complicated." I said, "Everything worth doing is complicated. You know that better than anyone." She looked at the yard. She looked at Mango, who was asleep against my shoe with the conviction of someone who had made a final decision. She said, "My grandmother is going to be watching from the kitchen window." I said, "Probably." She said, "So whatever happens next is going to be observed and reported." I said, "Then let's give her something accurate to report." There was a moment, just a moment, where neither of us moved. Then she leaned in, and I met her halfway, and it was quiet and chosen and nothing like the charged professional distance we had maintained for a year and a half. It lasted exactly long enough to be real. From somewhere inside the house, Daniela made a sound that was either a cheer or a startled exclamation. It was difficult to tell the difference. Maya pulled back. Her face was doing something I had not seen it do before. Something open, slightly undone, like a version of her that did not need the lanyard. She said, "She's been betting on this since February." I said, "What odds?" She said, "She gave us until Labor Day at the latest." I said, "Tell her she was early." She laughed, a real one, surprised and warm, the kind that she sometimes let out at the office when she forgot to edit it, and which I had been cataloging without meaning to for 18 months. The fireworks started properly at 9. We sat in the backyard with her family. Her mother had given me a plate of food 3 separate times, which I understood to be a form of approval, and the sky above the neighborhood broke open in the particular chaos of the 4th. And Maya was sitting close enough that our shoulders were touching, which she had not moved away from, and neither had I. Her grandmother caught my eye across the yard at some point during the display. She gave me the smallest nod. I gave it back. 6 weeks later, we told HR. It required a form and a 30-minute meeting with our manager, who said, with the composure of someone who had seen this coming, that as long as we kept it professional during working hours, there were no structural concerns. Maya said that was fine. I said that was fine. We sat on opposite sides of the conference table and were very professional about the whole thing. On the way out, she CC'd me on something, and I replied all with a comment that was technically about the brief and functionally a joke that only she would catch. She sent back one line. I could hear her laughing from across the floor. Nothing about us had changed. Except everything had. A year later, her grandmother asked me the same question she had asked on the back step. She asked what I saw when I looked at her. I said the same thing I had said the first time, because it was still true, and then I said one more thing that I had learned in the years since, that she made coffee in my kitchen like she had always lived there, and that she had been right to come to my door, and that the thing I was most grateful for was that she had not found a better option, and had knocked anyway. Her grandmother said, "Good." She said it the same way she had said "I believe you," with the authority of someone who asked the question, because she intended to hold you to the answer. I have been held to it since. 2 years later, when people ask how we got together, Maya says we were rivals who ran out of reasons not to be something else. I say she showed up at my door on a federal holiday and made coffee and handed me a list. We are both correct. The version we tell depends on who is asking and what they can handle. The part we always agree on. Mongo approved first. He sat on my shoe within the first hour. We have learned to trust his judgment. What would you have done if someone introduced you as their partner before you'd agreed to it, and the lie felt more honest than anything you'd said out loud? And have you ever told yourself a feeling was professional when you knew, somewhere, that it wasn't? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one got you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.